What would you do if the people meant to save you became your tormentors? If the system designed to protect you, instead handed you a life sentence of abuse? I ultimately made my abusers pay a stunning price, watching as their world turned to ash. And it all started with a seemingly insignificant event, a broken wrist, on the day I was taken from my parents. The story I'm about to tell you is full of sadness and heartache. I started life in poverty, living with my parents in a house with a mix of wooden and dirt floors. My mother struggled with a long list of mental health issues, and my father was an alcoholic, but a gentle one who was never abusive. When I was 7 and my sister, Chloe, was just 4, we were taken from our home and thrust into the foster care system in Kentucky. The home we were sent to was run by a widow we'll call Agnes. Her husband had died in the 80s, leaving her with 4 sons and 1 daughter. Her youngest son, Lyle, still lived with her. He'd fallen from a truck as a kid, damaging his skull, which left him with a learning disability. At 26, he couldn't read or write. The oldest son, Roy, was a plumber. Another, Earl, owned 5 large farms and a grocery store. A 4th son, Shane, had been shot and killed years ago. Her only daughter, Claire, was very kind to us. Agnes's home was a longhouse with 6 bedrooms, and under Kentucky rules at the time, she could pack 4 kids into each room with no limit on how many foster children she could take in. She kept at least 8 kids at a time, a constantly revolving door of faces as some would stay for a week and then return to their families. This wasn't a home, it was a business. Entering the foster system was terrifying. I'll never forget the sound of my parents' screams as we were ripped from the only home I'd ever known. A social worker deemed the converted barn we lived in unsuitable because we lacked running water and electricity. The day I arrived at Agnes's, my wrist was broken and wrapped in a cast. The first thing we did was go shopping for clothes, since I'd come with nothing. But the moment we returned, the illusion of care vanished. I was handed a trash bag and ordered outside, told not to come back in until every piece of loose trash was picked up from the yard. I quickly realized this place was more of a work camp than a loving home. As I worked, her son Lyle was lounging in the swimming pool. He called me over and asked if I wanted to swim. I told him no, I couldn't swim, and pointed to my cast. He just grabbed me and tossed me into the deep end. I screamed, swallowing water, convinced I was going to die. He took his sweet time before finally jumping in and pulling me out. As I coughed and gasped on the concrete, he sneered, "Stop crying. If you would have drowned, no one would have cared because you don't matter." His words echoed in my head that night as I cried, missing my parents, knowing this was only the beginning of a long, hard 12 years. Agnes told me another boy would be sharing my room, a kid named Marcus who was away at summer camp. He was almost 18 and about to age out of the system. When he returned, he was huge, at least 6 feet 2 inches and over 230 pounds. The first night he was back, my worst fears were realized. I was already having trouble sleeping, haunted by the longing for my parents. In the dark, I saw his large frame rise from his bed and cross the room to mine. He tried to force himself on me, holding my nose shut so I couldn't breathe. I had no choice but to open my mouth, and in that moment, instinct took over. I bit down as hard as I could. He roared and smacked me so hard I was knocked unconscious. The next morning, my face throbbing and my mouth busted, I ran to tell Agnes what happened. She took me into her room, listened to my entire story, and then confronted him. Marcus spun a lie, claiming I was trying to steal his money and he'd hit me for it. I denied it, but when he checked his wallet, he claimed money was missing. Agnes searched my pockets and, to my horror, pulled out a $20 bill. While I was unconscious, he had planted it on me. My punishment was to scrub the entire front porch. For nights, I sat by my bedroom door, terrified to sleep, afraid he would hurt me again. Exhaustion made me clumsy. I'd fall asleep during my chores and get in trouble for it. A few days later, I was in my room playing with some toy cars when Marcus walked in and closed the door. I started screaming, but he jumped on me, covering my mouth. Agnes was outside and couldn't hear me. "If you scream again, I'm going to smack you again," he hissed. At 7 years old, with a broken arm, I was helpless. He spit in my mouth and made me swallow it. I don't know what else he would have done, but just then, Agnes called for him from inside the house. This time, I didn't just cry. I laid there, my mind racing. I decided I wouldn't let him hurt me again. I crept into the kitchen, stole a fillet knife, and hid it under my pillow. That night, he came for me again, getting into my bed, Remember what happens if you scream, he whispered. I nodded, my hand closing around the knife hidden under the covers. As he pushed my head down, I unleashed my own terror. I slashed and cut him as many times as I could. He screamed, disarmed me, and fled to the bathroom, bleeding everywhere. I ran to wake Agnes. She called 911, then turned to me with cold eyes. Don't you say a word to the cops. Go back to bed. She and Marcus told the police he'd been sleepwalking and cut himself by accident. She warned me that if I said anything, no one would believe me because I was a known liar. Marcus never came back after that, and I never found out what happened to him. But Agnes, in a final act of cruelty, forced me to wash all of Marcus's blood from the bed, the carpet, the kitchen, and the bathroom as my punishment. The verbal abuse from Agnes and Lyle was constant. We were told we were worthless, that we'd never be anything, that we were lucky to be with them instead of in jail or dead. They told us we were just like our parents, useless. If any of us wanted to join a sports team or an after-school club, they'd say, why waste the time? You'll never amount to anything anyway. She threatened to have me sent to a boys' home, separated from Chloe, if I ever told anyone how we were treated. Our lives were a cycle of brutal labor. We woke at 4 a.m. every day to do farm work for Agnes's son, Earl, feeding cows, chickens, and pigs, then, a mad dash to get clean for the school bus that arrived around 6:20 a.m. We got home from school, ate quickly, and went right back to work, often on Earl's tobacco farms, not getting to bed until 11 p.m. Earl was getting rich off the free labor of foster children. It was nearly impossible to pass our classes with only the bus ride home to do homework. One night, when I was about 10, I woke up to go to the bathroom and heard faint crying from the girls' room. I pushed the door open and saw Lyle on top of a 16-year-old girl. I ran to get Agnes, and he scrambled out after me. He immediately lied, telling his mother he caught me sneaking into the girls' room. I tried to explain what I saw, but Agnes refused to believe me. Lyle would never do such a thing, she said. You're telling lies, and you're in for it tomorrow. The next morning on the bus, the girl told me she would deny everything, claiming it was her idea. My punishment was to clean out a massive, rotting garbage bin behind the house, full of maggots and filth, without gloves. It took 6 hours. This was my first bitter lesson in how the system protects itself. At my next visit with my parents at the social worker's office, I told her everything, about Lyle, the abuse, the forced labor. She promised a surprise visit the next day, but I later learned that the social workers in our county hated paperwork and conflict. They always gave foster homes a heads up. The social worker, in that single phone call, chose her own convenience over a child's safety. She didn't know it then, but in protecting Agnes from a minor inconvenience, she was enabling years of escalating cruelty. Sure enough, when we got home from school, her car was already in the driveway. Agnes cornered me. I know what you've done, she hissed. You're going to wish you had never opened your mouth. The social worker talked to the girl, then gathered all of us in the living room. She made an example out of me, lecturing everyone on the importance of telling the truth and warning them not to tell lies like I did. It's a chilling thought, but sometimes the people meant to protect children are the ones who fail them the most. As one person later commented online, social workers are supposed to be all about the kids and their safety, but this one was more concerned with avoiding conflict than with the truth. After she left, Agnes looked at me and said, I'm going to make you pay for this. It might not be today, but one day. When I turned 16, my parents finally signed over their rights to the state. The social worker told us we would be put up for adoption. I was heartbroken, but also excited to finally escape Agnes and her family. But weeks went by with no visits from potential parents. Then, one day, Agnes picked us up from school and announced, we're getting adopted today. I was confused. We arrived at the social worker's office to find my parents and Agnes in a room with a stack of paperwork. The social worker told me Agnes was adopting us. The moment she said it was a new kind of horror, my jaw literally dropped. It was a twist so cruel it felt like a nightmare. Agnes made her move with the precision of a predator. It wasn't an act of love. It was an act of ownership. By adopting us, she was removing the last layer of state oversight, giving herself unchecked power. This was her greatest miscalculation, revealing her fatal flaw, arrogance. She believed her control was absolute, never imagining the boy she was breaking would one day be the architect of her ruin. I started crying, telling them I would rather be dead than adopted by her. But the social worker dismissed my pleas, saying I was just a rebellious teenager who hated rules. My parents, weeping, had already signed the papers. I refused to sign, but she told me it didn't matter. The adoption would go through anyway. On the drive home, Agnes caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Her gaze was long and cold. "I told you one day you'll pay for what you've done," she said slowly, "and that day has arrived." A chill ran down my spine. Now that we were legally her children, the rule against physical discipline for foster kids no longer applied. The abuse escalated. Agnes would throw things at me, coffee cups, remote controls, even chairs. Lyle began beating me like a grown man for any perceived defiance. I felt broken and utterly alone. My sister Chloe, who was only 4 when she arrived, saw Agnes as her real mother and was brainwashed into thinking I was just a troublemaker. I felt like I had lost her, too, the one person I had sacrificed everything to protect. Not long after the adoption, my father, my hero, was diagnosed with throat cancer. I was crushed. My grand plan had always been to turn 18 and go live with my parents. We had never missed our monthly visits with them, walking to the park from the social worker's office. Now, my uncle was bringing us for home visits because my dad was too weak to travel. One day, while he was at a chemo appointment, someone broke into his house and stole all his pain medication. He knew who did it but wouldn't report it to the police. To poor people, cops are often seen as the enemy. A few days later, my uncle called me at school. My father, in unbearable pain, had tried to commit suicide. He passed away a few days later, his liver shutting down. It was October 25th, just 12 days before I turned 18. On the way home from the hospital, Agnes and her family showed their true colors. "Deadbeats like your father are just lazy people drawing a check from hardworking folks," one of them said. "It's a good thing he's dead. Now your mother needs to drop dead, too." I sat in the back of the van in silence, not shedding a single tear. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I would no longer let them control me. I made a promise to myself, I would be better than them, and one day, I would show them what my pain felt like. The day after my father's funeral, I started working with my uncle, saving every penny. I graduated high school at 19 and saved up $1,200, planning to go to Texas for underwater welding school. My uncle arranged a driver, but we had to take Agnes's van. About 4 hours into the trip, Agnes suddenly got tired of driving and ordered the driver to pull over. She kicked me out on a sidewalk in a strange city with nothing but a bag of clothes and my $1,200. As I watched her van drive away, a strange sensation rushed over me. I was free, finally free. I enrolled in a 2-year for-profit college I stumbled upon, got an associate's degree in computer science, and landed a job at a major tech company. I saved every dime. 7 years passed. My sister, Chloe, was getting married, and I was going to walk her down the aisle. The night before the wedding, her best friend, Maya, called me. She told me Chloe's fiancé was an abusive drunk, and that Agnes knew but had forbidden Chloe from calling it off, telling her not to embarrass her at the church, a place where Agnes was a respected figure. The next day, I walked my sister down the aisle. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the marriage, I stood up. The church fell silent. "I object to my sister being married to an abusive drunk," I said, my voice ringing through the hall. Agnes's face turned blood red. I then told everyone how Agnes knew about the abuse and had forced Chloe to go through with it anyway. Agnes shrieked that I was a known liar. But then, Chloe spoke up for me. "What he said is the truth," she said, and we ran out of the church together. Agnes was later asked to leave the church. The final revenge came years later. I was married, owned a home, and was living a great life. Chloe was happily married to a good man. Maya, who now worked at the county courthouse, called me with some interesting news. Agnes was behind on her property taxes, and the property was going up for a tax deed sale. It turned out Lyle, now a pillhead, had been taking Agnes's money for the taxes and using it to buy drugs. This was my moment. I showed up at the auction. The only other bidders were Lyle and his wife. He turned pale when he saw me, then tried to act friendly. Lyle, blinded by a lifetime of unearned authority, saw the same worthless kid he'd always tormented. He couldn't comprehend that I had changed. In that moment of friendly deception, his fate was sealed. I told him I was there to help keep the property in the family. I told him to let me win the bid, and I would pay the taxes so they'd never have to worry again. He swallowed the lie, hook, line, and sinker. The bidding started at around $2,000. I bid, He didn't. And just like that, the property that had been in their family for over 100 years was mine. I went to the house and told Agnes how I regretted being such a horrible child and was there to pay her back for being a mother to me. I told her I owned the property now and would handle the taxes. I said I was going to remodel the house, but they'd have to move out during construction. I lied and said the county would automatically evict them as part of the sale process. Believing me completely, she excitedly made plans to stay with her son Earl. I told her not to worry about packing. I'd handle everything. Then, I hired a lawyer and had them legally ejected from the property. After 30 days, all their belongings left in the house became mine. I contacted the local fire department and got a permit for a controlled burn. On the day of the fire, I went to Earl's house and invited Agnes and Lyle out for a picnic lunch under an old oak tree across the road from their old home, a place where we used to eat when we worked the farm. I dropped them off with snacks and told them I was just going to burn some old trash from the house. After notifying the fire department and the sheriff's office, who had closed the road at my request, I went behind the house and set fires with straw I had packed underneath. I stood beside them, chatting about my life and career. As the first flames began to peek around the sides of the home, they started screaming, yelling to call 911. That's when I told them the road was closed. I told them the fire department already knew I was burning my house on my property. What you're seeing, I said calmly, is just a fraction of the pain you caused me. I want you to feel what a fraction of my pain feels like. As the house was consumed by flames, collapsing in under 20 minutes, I just watched them sit there and sob. Lyle tried to fight me, but he was high and unstable. 30 minutes later, it was over. I got in my car and drove away, knowing they had now lost almost everything. In the end, this story isn't just about revenge. It's a reminder that abuse is never, ever okay, and that the lies abusers use to control you are powerless against a future you build for yourself. You can't change the past, but you have absolute influence over your future. What do you think is the most powerful way to reclaim your life after someone has tried to break you?